Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the second session of the day. Of course, we are all at the Accessibility and Inclusion Conference 2024. And for this session, we have Donna Boucher. She's going to be talking to us about effective and accessible assessment creation. Honestly, I think this is one of those places and one of those things we need to talk more about. I'm happy to see a lot of people popping into the chat as well, but we're going to let her go ahead and get started and fill us with a wealth of information and knowledge. Before that, however, let's meet a little bit about Donna. Donna is an ADHD instructional designer and education consultant. She specializes in diversity and inclusion, digital accessibility, and certification design. She has over 30 years of teaching experience and 10 years in instructional design. She works with clients to create accessible and effective training solutions. So obviously she has a wealth of knowledge to give, a lot of information to share, and so happy to have her. You're on.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me today. Super excited to present this topic. It's near and dear to my heart, simply because I have a disability and I have been affected by difficult assessment situations. I can't tell you the number of times of online learning that I've had to call my 13-year-old in to help me figure something out for an assessment, or I've been in tears because I couldn't create something and I felt dumb. I felt like I couldn't do it. So this is very near and dear to me, and I know that it's helpful for a lot of people. So here we go. Let's move on here. Bear with me here while I work on my technical. All right. So why is this so important? Well, I just kind of told you why it's important to me. We want to make sure that we're accurately assessing our students' knowledge. If we structure our assessments effectively and accessibly, then we're allowing students to actually demonstrate their knowledge, and we're allowing them to do it more accurately. So we're revealing their true intellectual progress. It's going to help you differentiate between students who have learned what you intended them to learn and those who have not. Most important reason of all, it motivates students to do their best because we're minimizing frustration and disengagement. And the best thing about what I'm showing you today is this is universal design. So by following these guidelines, you're making your assessments more accessible for everyone in the population. So before we get to question creation, I want to go over a few basics for assessments. So here's the first one. Have you included your learning objectives? So they're super important. They give our students clarity and focus. They give them a roadmap. They also give the instructors a roadmap. It outlines exactly what the expectations are for learning, and it helps maintain focus and direction throughout the course. It's also guiding your students in, whoops, did I just change slides? I did. It's also guiding students for focus on what they need to study. So they can look at those learning objectives and know that this is what's being tested, this is what I need to learn. For assessment and feedback, all assessments should be built on the learning objectives. So if you don't have them, it's not possible. It allows us to actually accurately measure whether the students have met the objectives of the course and gives us an ability to provide feedback for them to improve. When you're creating your learning objectives, are you using Bloom's taxonomy? So for those of you who may not know what Bloom's taxonomy is, it's a framework for categorizing your education goals. I use it in all of my courses. You can Google it if you're not sure. My top Google hit is Bloom's taxonomy verbs, because it's those verbs that we use in our learning objectives that are so important. So basically what we have here is the essentials course. So level 1, if you've got a basic introductory course, you're just testing that intro knowledge of a beginner, you're looking at Bloom's 1 and 2. So remembering and understanding. We want to measure the student's ability to recall those basic facts and concepts and to explain those ideas or concepts in a simple way. We're not getting into the more advanced stuff yet. So when you get into that advanced course or your applied course, the upper levels, you're looking at Bloom's 2 to 5. So we want them to understand, apply, analyze, and evaluate. You're not seeing Bloom's Level 6 on here because it's really not possible in a multiple choice exam situation. This is where you're asking students to actually create things. And I don't really think that can be fully evaluated fairly in this type of situation. So I haven't included it there. So building these learning objectives is your first step to building an effective and accessible assessment. I use a Excel spreadsheet when I'm creating my courses. And so I'll have my modules, my subtopics, and then I have my task item, which is my learning objective sitting there. And then I'm able to actually pair those learning objectives to the assessment questions. And you'll notice here, there's a whole pile of numbers sitting here. I actually do a quantitative analysis of my learning objectives so that I can figure out the percentage of learning objectives for each section. And that allows me to build my exam so that I'm testing the correct proportion of items for that learning objective. So for example, if your first learning objective is covering 20% of the total course material, and you had 10 questions on your exam, you would want 2 questions to cover that learning objective. So it gives you a quantitative way to build your exams rather than kind of guessing where things should be. So here, let's get into the writing exam questions. Let's have some fun with this. I'm going to have some audience interaction. So this should be fun. Let's see what we've got here. So first item is, what are the parts of the question? We use specific terminology when referring to questions. So here we go. I've used a Harry Potter example here with the giant spider from the movie. And I'm asking in my question stem, what was the name of the spider? So I gave my preamble, my pre-information here in the Harry Potter book, The Chamber of Secrets. A gigantic spider almost killed Harry, Ron, and Fang in the Forbidden Forest. So my question stem is, what was the name of the spider? And you'll notice here, I'm telling students how many answers to choose. I don't know if you've been in a situation where you're faced with like 7 answers and they say, select all that apply. So my brain says, I'm not doing that. I'm just going to keep clicking till I'm done. The whole idea of having to guess what the answer is and how many of them are going to be correct is just too much for me. It's overwhelming. So best thing you can do for your learners right off the bat, tell them you're going to be selecting one answer. So under the parts of the question, we have our correct response. This is the only time today that I'm actually going to tell you the correct answers to my fun questions. So here you are. This is the correct response. These 3 are called distractors. Basically, they are the incorrect answers designed to distract or confuse the respondent. And by confuse, we need to do it fairly. And I'm going to show you how to confuse your students in a fair way. So we're going to look at that in a little bit. So what makes a good question? The question has to be fair to the student. You can't trick them. And by using these guidelines, that's how you're going to be able to build fair questions. They need to be aligned with the lesson objectives. You need to use credible distractors, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. They need to be the appropriate level of ability. So if your learning objective is written at a level 2 Bloom's level, then you would want your multiple choice or your exam question to also be written at that level, because that's what we've told students we want them to learn. And we're going to look a little bit later about how to decide whether a question is a certain Bloom's level. So I have some examples there for you. Finally, we want to use language that's clear and easy to understand. If you've got questions that are worded badly, are using lots of abbreviations, or just language that's not easy to understand, your students don't stand a chance, and you're not going to be measuring their true understanding. So that's a really important one, is to make sure that they're clearly worded. How many answer choices should there be? Honestly, I did an exam once. It had a multiple choice question with like 8 possible answers. And my brain shuts down. I'm like, oh, no, I can't do this. This is already enough. I'm already in an exam situation. I'm already worried that I'm not going to pass. And now you want me to look at 8 possible answers. That's a lot. So there's actually been some scientific studies done. And what they found was the magic number for students is 3 to 4 answer choices. The other great thing is if you're using this similar number, so 3 or 4 answer choices, you can actually measure how much time it's going to take for that exam to be completed. And you can also measure the difficulty. It's easier than having lots of different answer choices in there. So science says 3 to 4 answer choices are most effective. Some science says you can go up to 5. In my experience, 3 or 4 has always been sort of that Goldilocks principle, that happy area where the majority of people are comfortable. And again, I have that little accessibility reminder to always tell your students how many answer choices they need to select. Are they choosing 1 answer? Are they choosing 3 answers? You always have to let them know that. It's important. All right, sore thumbs. So make sure there aren't any sore thumbs. What the heck is a sore thumb? Some of you might be asking. I mean, other than a sore thumb, like you hit your thumb with a hammer, right? Sore thumb. You ever heard the saying, it sticks out like a sore thumb? And what that saying means is that something stands out and it's easily noticed because it's different from everything around it. So it's sticking out. And so that's why we call it a sore thumb. So for question writing, a sore thumb is any answer due to the way it's constructed that could correctly or incorrectly encourage a student to choose it over the other answers. So by correctly or incorrectly, we could actually be encouraging a student to choose a wrong answer, or we could be encouraging them to choose a correct answer. I can tell you, I have passed exams based solely on finding sore thumbs. It's a little challenge I give myself when I'm doing fun quizzes and stuff online. And I will try and answer everything based on sore thumbs, and I pass more exams that way. So be careful of your sore thumbs. So here, let's have a look. Can you find the sore thumb? So please feel free to pop it into the chat here and let me know which of these answers you would consider to be the sore thumb. Everybody, oh, I'm not scrolled down in my latest messages here. Awesome. Yep, I see you're all putting in that correct answer there. So yes, our sore thumb is D. Oh, I can see I'm overlapping on my screens here. There we go. Okay, so why is option D the sore thumb? It's longer than all the other answers. It's got 2 words. All the other ones have 1. It starts with a G. All the other ones start with an A. And it actually uses one of the words from the question. It uses the word devices, and that is called cluing. I see that a lot in exams, and it's something that you want to try and avoid, is that idea of cluing the answer. And as you can see here, this is not a fair question. We have clued our students to answer D in 4 different ways. So we're really not testing knowledge here. We're testing the psychology of the human brain, which will always go to the one that sticks out. So yeah, just for fun, can anyone tell me the correct answer to this question? What is the name of the company that creates Wile E. Coyote's many devices? You can throw that into the chat. Yeah, there we go. I see lots of the right answers in there. So the correct answer is Acme. A, the answer is A. Well done. All right. So next thing we need to make sure is that there aren't any enemies. What's an enemy? So an enemy is a question that tests the same material where the answer to one question will clue the answer to the other question. Have you ever done that exam where you're on question 6 and you're like, oh my gosh, I know that. That's in question number 2. And you flip back to question 2 because you know the answers for question number 6 is there. Yes. So we want to avoid those enemies. One way of doing that is keeping track in your Excel file and listing your enemies. So you would have a column in your Excel that says enemies. And if question number 1 is an enemy of number 6, you would put that in that column. So you can clearly see not to include those on the same exam. The other one is what we just talked about, that cluing, where the question stem is cluing an answer so the question stem could clue an answer, or it could clue an answer in another question. So we're going to have a look at an example of that now, and we're going to ask you, can you find the enemies? What is that word that is cluing? Can anyone tell me what that is? You could throw it into the chat. There's a word in there that's cluing everything in both of those questions. Yeah, so I see it listed there. I see a couple people coming in now with some answers. So you got it. So Space Jam is our cluer. So Space Jam was the answer here. And it's also explained in this question here. So if these were on the same exam, your students would likely get to this one and go, oh, that's the name. And then they'd go back here and change their answer. So that's why we want to avoid cluing, because we're really not testing knowledge at this point. We're testing our students' ability to recognize something and go back and change it based on that new information. So not knowledge. All right, so that's my preamble to creating multiple choice questions. Let's get into the actual questions now. So how to create different types of multiple choice questions. Apologies for the type on there. It used to be white. Let's see here. So here's our first one. Standard multiple choice question. It's a Bloom's level 1. It's a basic recall question, suitable based on your learning objective. We've told the students how many answers are required, which one of the following. The answers are all similar in construction. There's no sore thumbs. The wording is clear and simple. Does anyone know the answer to this question? You can throw that into the chat. If you know who said ba-da, 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 that's all, folks. The end of the Looney Tunes. You got it. Yep, you got it, everyone. Porky Pig. Answer A. That is the answer to your question. There he is down in the corner there. All right, so our next one. A standard multiple choice question, Bloom's level 2. At this level, we're focusing on comprehension. So we're asking our students to grasp the meaning of the information, but to be able to interpret it or explain it differently. So notice the construction of the distractors. They're all similar. You should. You should. You should. You shouldn't. You shouldn't. See how they're paired. So if you had one answer that says you shouldn't, that would make it a sore thumb. So that's where you need to be careful with your sore thumbs. They can sneak in based on construction. Does anyone know the answer to this question? All right. Got some Greek mythology people in the house here. You got it. So the moral of the Greek myth is you should always listen to what your elders tell you to do. Although yes, D could be right. You shouldn't fly with wings made of wax. That was a good lesson to learn. It was not the moral of the story. So you can see how important language is, correct? All right, so you got the answer for that one. Let's look at our next Bloom's level. So Bloom's level 3, standard multiple choice question. Now we're focusing on application. We want them to take the information they learned and apply it in a new situation. So perhaps we taught them how to read bar graphs. So notice the bar graph. From an accessibility point of view, not only do we have colored bars, but the actual rainfall amounts are shown above them. This makes the image more accessible for anyone who might have difficulty interpreting visual information. It also allows for a more accurate comparison. Does anyone know the answer to this one? You can throw it in the chat. I see someone asking if A is a sore thumb. Gabrielle, I'm not sure if you're meaning this question or the previous one. For this one, you know what? It could be a sore thumb. It is a little bit longer than all the other ones. So it depends how strictly you want to follow sore thumb guidelines. I know some people are really, really strict and some people are not. It really depends on the client that I'm working with as to where that threshold lies for sore thumbs. If you're talking about the previous one, let me just go back here for a second. I wouldn't see a sore thumb in this one. They're both starting with you should always, you should always. These are you shouldn't, and they're all similar length. So if you are talking about this one, I'd love for you to throw it into the Q&A so that we can have a look at maybe why you think that. It's possible I'm missing something. So yeah, would love to hear your thoughts on that. Okay, let's see. Did we all get our correct answers? We did. Well done. Answer is C for May. All right, here's our next one. This is a popular one on exams. We often see the missing word questions. This is a Bloom's level 1. So fill in the missing words. The 3 primary colors are red, blue, and there's your blank. So see here. We're simply focused on recall here. Just remember what you learned in the material. We're not asking for anything more than that. We're really helping them get to that answer. So this is a really nice basic question if you want to include it. Sometimes you might have a really difficult concept or a difficult definition, and the missing word allows you to test it more easily. So it's a great tool for assessing this level of knowledge. I have a question. What's wrong with the distractors? Can anyone tell me the problem with the distractors? Yeah, so I have someone saying, would it be potentially confusing with the 5 crayons in the image? It could be. Depends on your learners. That's not something that I thought about, but definitely something to consider. So it doesn't say how many to choose. Good. Yep. And 2 words. I see it there. 2 words. So option D has 2 words, violet pink. It's actually a Crayola color. I had to look it up on the internet to find a 2-word color. So yeah, it's 2 words. So it's sticking out as a sore thumb. So you would want to use something that's more in line with what you already have for options A through C. So well done on that. Longer than the other answers, and it has 2 words. All right, our next one. These questions get a little bit more tricky. So list question. These ones can be really, really hard for students. So we need to scaffold or structure their experience so that we can make it a little bit easier for them. So list questions are considered to be at least a Bloom's level 2. You can construct them so that they're higher than that. They're more difficult than our standard multiple choice questions because they're asking a student to recall more information by actually analyzing a list of options and then asking them to choose which options are correct. So one of the things we do to make this easier for our students is we put the answer choices in the same order. So this is the order that we would always use for a list question. These are the options they can choose from, 1 to 4, frog, snake, turtle, newt. But this is the answer option. So which 2 are correct? So we would always have these in the same order. The other reason we do that is because if they're not in that order, you can end up with sore thumbs, meaning you might have more than 2 each of these numbers. You see how we've got 2 1s, 2 2s, 2 3s, and 2 4s. So we've avoided our sore thumbs by doing that. Okay, so can anyone tell me the answer to this question? I see some people might already be putting it in there. You guys are good. Getting ahead here. All right. So which 2 of the following are considered amphibians? Very good. We've got some scientists here. So the answer is 1 and 4. Frog and newt. Snakes and turtles are reptiles. There you go. All right. And this is our most difficult question coming up. Most people do not like these. They work wrong. Our brains don't work this way. Have you noticed since kindergarten, we've always been asked for the right answers? The teacher has never asked the class to give us the wrong answer. Our brains are just not made this way. They're really hard questions, so we need to use them sparingly and always make sure that our wording is extra simple and clear. I always capitalize the negative word to draw attention. Yeah, I hate them too, absolutely. So we capitalize that negative word, so we're highlighting it for the student, and we're just trying to make it a little easier. Like I said, we've been trained since the beginning to find the correct answer. So we're asking them to eliminate answers here. Do we have any Spider-Man fans here? Do you guys know what the correct answer is to this question? We do. The other thing that makes this one kind of crazy is they all say Spider-Man. So to the eye, you're seeing things that are very similar. I see a question here. If this type of question is hated, why use them? So it's a great question. I try to use them sparingly. Occasionally, you will find a time where they're appropriate. It's just the material that you're testing requires them to choose something that's not correct. So you have to kind of judge your situation. Like I said, I use them sparingly. If I have an exam with 10 questions on it, I might use 1. So I really don't use them a lot because they're not friendly to the learner. But like I said, in some situations, they are appropriate and you are testing the student's ability to find which one doesn't belong. All right, so you guys got it. Answer B, the Spider-Man experience. I had to make that one up. All right, here's our last one. Why don't we use true-false questions? I see them all the time, and I think one of the reasons why a lot of people use them is they're easy. They don't require a lot of thought on the part of the exam construction. So a lot of people will use them. You only have to come up with one distractor. So they're quick and easy. But the problem is they're testing, they're only testing the surface level of knowledge. So they're focused on recognition rather than understanding your application. There's a huge guessing probability. I don't know, when your students get to the end of a test, they're tired, they're overwhelmed, they're exhausted. Maybe they were up all night, studying, or this is for a high stakes exam. They're probably going to get to a point where they're like, oh, just to heck with this. I'm just guessing. I don't know what the answer is. So they're not going to give you a lot of insight into your learner's knowledge simply because of those reasons. So they're easy to create and grade, but they certainly have their limitations. So I tend not to use them. You can create true-false questions in a multiple choice way. So simply by saying which one of the following is true and offering them 3 or 4 options. You can do the negative, which one of the following is false, and again, offering them 3 options. So you're just moving this into that multiple choice space. All right, so good question design principles. I have no idea what has happened to my presentation, my contrast here for accessibility. This is an example of bad contrast, and I didn't do it, at least not on purpose. So there you go, little teachable moment. So guidelines for wording our questions. We always ask a direct question. We avoid lecturing or lengthy discussion or tons of information. Yes, muted colors. I totally agree, Lindsay. All right. So we use words like should or must, but we shouldn't use words like would, could, or can. Those are uncertain words. So we really want to test the absolute if we can as much as possible. At the same time, we don't want to use the words always, all, or never. I don't know how many of you out there have looked at an exam question that uses those, and you can always come up with a reason why it would not be always, all, or never. And it makes it really hard to answer that question because my brain will automatically be, well, like, I don't know. I mean, always, 100%, always. I don't know about that. I can always come up with reasons why it wouldn't be. The other one is not to use double negatives. So I have a really simple example here of a double negative. I don't have no money. So there's two negatives in that sentence, which makes it very confusing for the learner. You would rather say, I don't have any money, to keep it clear and simple. The other phrasing that you want to avoid is negative phrasing. So you can see the two examples I have here on the screen. So the first one is negative phrasing, and it says, this is not to say that the proposal is not without merit. So that's really wordy, hard to understand. It would be so much more simple for your students if you just said the proposal lacks merit. So that's where that clear and simple phrasing comes in for the wording of your questions and also for your distractors. Okay, guidelines for wording the answer and distractors. Please don't use none of the above or all of the above. I can actually pass exams based on those answers because usually that is the correct answer. It's a sore thumb just by its own design. So avoid using those at all costs. It's harmful to your learning because if they are the correct answer, it really doesn't take a lot of effort. As I just said, I can usually pinpoint them pretty quickly. And if they're not the correct answer because they're a sore thumb, the student is drawn to them because they're going to doubt themselves. They're going to be like, oh gosh, maybe it is all of them, or maybe it isn't all of them. So it's much better to offer them 4 clear points or to do a list question where you're asking them to choose 2. Now, one of the ways of getting around in all of the above is if you have a list of items that you want to test, you could say the following list of primary colors is shown below, and you would show 2 of them, so blue and yellow, and then you would have a blank on the 3, and it becomes a fill in the missing blank kind of question because then you're going to say, which one of the following is the missing third option? So that's a way to get away from the all of the above or the none of the above for writing distractors. Avoid repeating the question as a statement in the responses. So again, let's go back to our primary colors. You're asking students which one of the following is the missing primary color. So then each of your options would say, the missing primary color is yellow. The missing primary color is purple. The missing primary color, it's so many words to look at. Just put the answer. So don't repeat the question in your responses when you're giving them to the students as distractors. So finally, as we fire along here to the end of the presentation, I have some parting accessibility tips. Pardon again for the contrast. So make sure that your instructions are clear for the users, especially in e-learning. Don't assume that learners know how to complete the assessment. One of the biggest problems I have is matching questions when you don't tell me how to complete them. Do I drag it? Do I click it? How do I complete this question? You've got to provide clear instructions for your users because I will tell you from experience, your users will either end up in tears thinking that they're not capable, or they will be calling their 13-year-old into the room to finish it and figure it out for them. So make sure that you're giving those clear instructions. Another thing you can do is offer an audio alternative that makes it so much more accessible for those who are not reading or who learn better by listening. So offer that audio alternative for listening to the instructions, the questions, and the answer options. Make sure that the buttons are large enough to be easily seen and targeted. I don't know how many of you guys are on Google or Apple and you play games and the ads come up and you can't find the little X button, or it's too small and you end up going into the ad. Make sure those buttons are large enough so that everyone can see them. Make sure that there's good color contrast for them, and make sure they have accurate and descriptive alt text labels. If you're using multiple choice buttons for choosing, make sure that those buttons are labeled option A with the actual answer on it. Flexible timing. We don't want to do countdowns and timers. That's a really great way for me to fail an exam, is if you tell me I have a certain amount of time, because I will be watching the clock for that entire amount of time. And use straightforward language. Avoid the jargon, abbreviations, or metaphors. You'll notice earlier I used a metaphor. It's called the sore thumb. And I was clear in my description of what it means. Unfortunately, that's jargon that I had no choice but to use, because it's something that we use in the industry. So make sure, if you are, that you're explaining that for your students. So there's some accessibility tips for you. And now here, finally, non-accessible question types. If you're working in Adobe, Articulate or Rise, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar entirely with the Adobe version, but I know in Articulate and Rise, drag and drop activities are not accessible. I have proven it to myself many, many times. So always provide an alternative if you're using a drag and drop activity, or don't include them at all. Because the other problem is, if you're doing an alternative to a drag and drop activity, you're actually reinforcing the idea that something's not accessible. You're saying, this isn't accessible, so I'm giving you a different way to complete it, which is nice and all, but I like to do universal design. So I want everyone to be able to finish my exams the same way. So I tend not to use drag and drops. Additionally, make sure that everything has detailed text descriptions for the information that you want to be conveyed. If you are using a drag and drop interaction, just make sure it's super clear. In Rise, sorting activities, carousel interactions, and flashcards are not accessible for all learners. So be careful when you're using those. Maybe use a text alternative. Sometimes I will provide PDFs to my learner. Well, actually not sometimes, all the time. All my learners get a PDF alternative to an e-learning course. I'm not great at learning on e-learning when I'm in a high stress situation. So I will always resort to the PDF myself. So I offer that to my students as well. So there's some accessibility tips in general for assessments, and I hope that you found this information useful. And yeah, so that's the end of my presentation. So here we go. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yes, thank you so much, Donna, for all that wonderful information. I think we do have a couple of questions. So let's go ahead and take a look at them, and we'll show them on the stage. So our first question: is there a specific WCAG guideline that aligns with the suggestion to always indicate how many answers the user should use? I will push for this for sure, but wondering if there's a specific area to reference.
There is not. No, this comes from me being autistic ADHD. It comes from feedback I've had from users. It is not in any of the established guidelines for WCAG. So I encourage everyone to push for it. So maybe one day it will be.
Excellent. Next question we have, you have a couple more even coming in as we speak. So next question is from Gabriel. What are your thoughts on immediate feedback versus full feedback at the end to be able to review everything?
That's a great question. So it depends on the situation. One of my clients, I work in compliance, and we do not give immediate feedback for the questions. Because they have to go through the material. Now, my preference is for that immediate feedback. Hey, you got this right. Good job. Or that's not quite right. Here's what you need to look at, or here's what you need to review. Even if you don't want to give them the right answer, at least tell them what they need to review to get that right. One of the great things that we found is with XAPI integration, you can actually use that to figure out which parts of the assessment are not going well for your students. So if a student come back and says, I failed, I don't know why, you can go into your data and you can say, oh, it looks like you had trouble with module 4. So you might want to review module 4. So I love immediate feedback, but I also think that full feedback has a place too if you're dealing specifically with your learners. So I love feedback. I think it's important.
Right. Next, let's see. Do you have any tips or suggestions for using hover over to provide learner hints or feedback?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of hover over. They're not always accessible for keyboard readers, for screen readers, or for non-keyboard non-mouse users. So it's difficult sometimes for keyboard users to pick up those hover points. I don't use them at all in my learning. I would rather use the different layers and have actual buttons. So for me, I stick to buttons, just because I know for sure that they're accessible.
Excellent. And I actually agree with you. I'm okay with buttons. I'm okay with layers.
Yeah.
It's it's just a better way to go in general.
Yeah. Then I know for sure, right? I don't want to put something in there that might not be accessible. So I always like to make sure that what I'm doing, I actually know is accessible.
Absolutely. So next we have, could you provide a few resources for accessible assessment design? Do you have any suggestions about any differences between designing accessible assessments for adult learners versus K through 12?
So there's not really a lot of resources out there. Most resources for assessment design, if you were to Google multiple choice question design, you'll get a lot of resources. None of them talk about accessibility. There's nothing I could find. So I don't have those resources. I'm happy to, I don't know, Rebecca, can I maybe put together a list and send it to you guys to put out later? I can try to
Absolutely.
put something together. Yeah. I'm even happy to send out a PDF of my presentation if that's helpful for people.
Yep, you can do that all day long. Always
Okay.
happy to help you.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll send it to you so that you guys have it. Differences for adult learners in K to 12. This is such a great question. So I've taught everything. I've taught from preschool all the way up to university, and my adult learners love it when I treat them like kids. So it's funny because if I do all the scaffolding and I do all that supportive work to make things accessible, my adult learners are so appreciative. Whereas we would just naturally make things kind and easy for kids. We don't think to do it for adults, right? So basically, if I'm designing for grade 8, kind of. When I'm doing my adult learners, I always design for grade 8, and they're always super appreciative. That idea of scaffolding and supporting the learner through their journey, I think applies to all ages.
Yeah, it does. Fabulous. Looks like we've got one more question for you. So what if the course is preparing for a timed exam? Would timed assessments in the course help prepare?
Yeah, so here's my suggestion for that. Offer them the option. So let's say they're preparing for a timed exam and you're giving them some practice exams. Offer them both so that the first few times they go through it, they can do it without being timed, because then they're actually testing their knowledge. So we want them to get comfortable testing their knowledge. Once they're comfortable doing that, then let's add in the timer and say, okay, you know your stuff, you know what you're doing. Now let's see if you can do it with that timer. So just graduate it for them and bring it into them gradually. And my best suggestion is to have plenty of practice opportunity for those timed exams.
And looks like we actually had a couple more questions come in. It's a
Sure.
really important topic. It's a really unique topic, so I'm not surprised at all.
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you think of a time when you have been able to provide corporate learners alternative assessments where they can choose how they demonstrate learning?
No. Sorry. Yeah, I do work in a corporate environment as well. So yeah, no. I push for it. So I try to offer as many different ways for people to do their assessments, and I always have an open door. So if someone comes to me in the organization and says, I can't do this, then I'm going to find a way for them to do it. Maybe we do it verbally, maybe it's orally presented to them, the questions,
Mhm.
or maybe, maybe they're working off of that PDF, or, just trying to give it to them in different ways is always the way that we go, is trying to present that information in different ways. But it's really hard in some corporate environments. I really wish that we could change that, but hopefully with accessibility being a focus, a growing focus, that corporate environment can change a little bit.
Always the hope. And looks like we
Yes.
have one more this time. So, in terms of gamification aspects, how would you make it accessible and articulate without using drag and drop interactions?
So I actually saw, I don't think it was in Articulate. I don't actually know what they used to create it, but I saw a matching interaction that could be accessible on the weekend. And instead of dragging the matches, you clicked on the two that you wanted to match together. So it was a click activity instead of a drag. And again, I don't know how they created it because I didn't have access to that, but it's something that I want to look into, because if we can click on a button, the button can be made accessible, whereas dragging something to something is not always. So I think that there's ways for us to create that accessibility, but I'm not sure that it's in actually dragging options across screens.
Absolutely right. A lot of it is going to end up being triggers, things like JavaScript, things that actually force
Yes. Yeah.
articulate to do the things we want. But I think I speak for everyone when I say what an amazing job you did and
Thank
what
you.
an enlightening experience it was for me, as well as I'm sure for everybody else on this session. So, do you have any last parting words before we?
Just really grateful to have so many people here that are interested in making the assessments accessible, because as a learner, I appreciate it. And I know a lot of people do. So, yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you so much, for Donna, for giving us all of your information and all of your knowledge and your time. Thank you so much for joining everybody here. And we will see you for our last session today in just a couple of hours.
Thank you
Okay,
so much.
bye, guys.